Hey everyone, we are just now getting started today. We'd like to welcome you to the 5th Annual Parent Network Conference. We are pleased to have join with us today. Actually, you're joining us for Finding Our New Normal, Strengthening Mental Health in a COVID World and Beyond. And we have with us today Tricia Ellinger, a parent, Dr. Franz from Pacific Source, and Pat Martell from the Idaho Federation of Families. Today, before we get started a little bit, I just want to make sure that I give you some housekeeping items. First of all, if you have questions during the session, there's a little Q&A button at the bottom of the screen on Zoom. Go ahead and use that and we will be checking it. We may have some polls that pop up. In fact, we have one at the beginning. They're anonymous, so we just like to contribute it. Like you to contribute. It helps us know who is watching, so we can direct our comments. After the session, you will see a survey about the session you just attended. Please go ahead and take it. If you are an Idaho parent, the Idaho Parent Network just put its next survey live, actually went live yesterday. And we'd love to help your help getting us some data about what is happening in Idaho with families who have kiddos with mental health issues. And in the coming days, you will see a recording of today's session and the slides and some resources. So check back at idahoparentnetwork.org. You can find both the survey and the resources at that link. And so with that out of the way, let's talk about our learning objectives. They are understanding the impacts of COVID to our mental health and identifying strategies to improve impacts on our mental health and identifying what we have learned and how we can use that moving forward. Go ahead and you guys take it away.
Okay, I will start. Hello, everyone, and welcome. One thing we've observed about the impact of COVID-19 is basically three general areas. And number one, of course, is our physical safety. We're doing physical distancing. We have various safety precautions with masking, etc. And the second biggest thing that seems to be happening is the economic upheaval. We have a limited ability to work or to obtain needed goods, supply chains are disruptive, and on and on. But the third, and perhaps one of the bigger issues that is not getting a whole lot of attention in a lot of areas is the psychological impact. That is the toll of being locked away from each other is having a tremendous impact on families and individuals. Before we get into talking about that, we probably want to talk about a little bit about trauma. Trauma basically is a response that we have to a deeply distressing or disturbing event that overwhelms our ability to cope, causes feelings of helplessness, and diminishes our sense of self and our ability to feel the full range of emotions and experiences. COVID and the way it has happened in our homes and in our places of work and in our communities can easily trigger a trauma response. And of course, that would definitely include anxiety because that's one of the main features. There's a term has been coming around that we've been talking about in the industry of mental health, and that is COVID anxiety. This is basically because our stability and our predictability have been hijacked. We've been catapulted out of our comfort zones and we're scrambling to find new ones. And many things are impacting us at the same time. So if you look at that little illustration, we've got COVID-19, maybe I don't have enough money for my rent, maybe I'm having to be a school teacher and do some homeschooling for my kids. And that red triangle in the middle is just illustrating that all this happening at once is the big impact that can stimulate a lot of anxiety. Let's think a minute about what are the things in your circles. And it's not necessarily just three circles. There could be another circle that says, my car won't run. There could be another circle that says, I can't get diapers for my baby. The store has run out. There's any number of overlapping issues, and that is the element that is really contributing to anxiety and to trauma. So moving on, there's a few elements here we can talk about. One of the preconditions to experiencing trauma is a lack of predictability. So one thing we can do about that is we can make schedules. We can organize our life to be as predictable as possible. Another precondition to trauma is immobility. When we are feeling when we're in the middle of it, when we're experiencing it, when you're seeing on the news the rates that are going up, sometimes we just freeze. We freeze in our spot where we're at. We can't do anything. It's very hard to move. The solution to that is to activate your body, take care of things. You know, there's that closet in your house that's full of everything. Maybe now's a good time to clean it out. And you might not feel like you have the energy to do that, but this is for your mental health. It is very, very necessary that you continue to keep moving your body, because one of the things, as we're talking about here, that leads into trauma is that frozen state when we're not moving. The other precondition to trauma is a loss of connection. So it's very important that we try to keep our natural rhythms of life going. Have meals together, play games together, storytelling, enjoy music together. Someone had mentioned to me the idea of when it's lunchtime, find another friend that they are having lunch as well and eat your sandwiches together, even though you're miles apart. Get on a screen and share what you're having for lunch, and share that 10 to 20 minutes with a friend while you're having your lunch. These things add up and can be very, very helpful.
I want to kind of talk about these preconditions to trauma just from a parent perspective. You know, we had a pretty good schedule and organized life. It was pretty predictable. We were pretty active prior to COVID. And so what we found is the beginning, when we were all in quarantine in March and April and so forth, this worked really well. So we actually got out into our, we have a great big park system here, things that we hadn't done before. We were spending a lot more time together, and we learned some flexibility. And so we kind of went through that fairly well. But if I was to look back at your COVID anxiety, one of my circles would be, how are my neighbors and community responding to COVID? So in my small community, my neighbors were mingling and visiting and playing together during the quarantine time, and I was in complete panic mode. I have pre-existing conditions and asthma, and I'm telling my 3 children, you can't play with them. You can play in our yard. You can't go play over there with their bicycles. And so my anxiety was super high, and I felt so much anger towards my neighbors who I felt were disrespecting our family's health. And that caused some ramifications in our small little subdivision, in our small little town. Like, that's the crazy lady. But my family were like, we really get it, Mom. We don't want you to get sick. And so as these conditions to trauma, we thought we had a really good system in place, and I'm having now to revisit these things. So what does it look like? I am pretty connected to my family, but not the outside world. So I want to share my lunch. Like you said, I need to do those things that I missed now that my kids are in school and they are doing distance learning, but I'm still not connecting with other people. I mean, social media is one thing, but I'm not FaceTiming people. And I need to, that's an added thing, because as this continues, I need to connect to people in a different way. So thank you for sharing all those ideas. I love it.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing that up, because, you know, I personally have had a very similar experience where people around me are not wearing masks, and it does feel very disrespectful. It does. Another precondition to trauma on our next slide refers to numbing out and spacing out. And that is a very common response from us as humans. Whenever we are in a trauma condition, we start getting numb. And the way to combat this is mindfulness. Some of you may have heard this term before. Mindfulness is referring to the idea of being here right now, in this moment, being right here, not worrying about yesterday, not worrying about tomorrow. One of the most basic ways to practice mindfulness is deep breathing. Because when you're breathing deep, you are in that moment. You're nowhere else but right here, taking in oxygen very, very deep, hold it for a moment, blow it out really slow. Do 3 of those in a row and your blood pressure comes down, your mind clears up a little bit, and you are better able to function. Another thing that happens to us in preconditions to trauma is a loss of a sense of time. I don't know about any of you, but in my life on almost a daily basis, coworkers, friends, family have been, what day of the week is it? What time is it now? When is dinner? It's like, including myself, we're off the clock, we're off the calendar. Every single day seems like the same because we're isolated, we're not back in our normal lives. It's really important that we all develop an inner sense that every moment is different from the next. And the deep breathing is a good way to get in touch with that, because that helps us understand these 3 seconds I was breathing in, these next 3 seconds I'm breathing out. And it's very rudimentary, but it is square one to starting to understand that, yeah, you are moving through time. This isn't just a frozen.
What I found as a parent is that I forget to eat. And so having insulin dependent diabetes, that can be very bad. And so your mindfulness is, I need to remember to be here in the moment and remember those very important, it's time to eat breakfast, it's time to eat lunch. Obviously dinner's easier because my kids are home, but that everything isn't just a mess in my mind, that there are regular daily things that need to occur, and I do need to be mindful about that. So eating and not forgetting to eat is super important just for me. And I'm pretty sure that there are other people having that same experience. Like, I don't even know. Yeah. Like, I don't know what day it is. I don't know what season it is. And so being mindful in the moment and actually enjoying, I love fall. Fall's a good season, that I love it. And so this is something that I can enjoy and be mindful about instead of just moving through the motions.
Well, I'm glad you said that, because, we're interested in how are we going to be managing our families. But, if you're not okay, you're not really going to be able to help your family. It's just like on the airplane, when the oxygen falls down, put your oxygen on, and then you're able to help your child or whoever you need to help. But if you're not okay, you're not going to be able to do that. So that is very relevant. You apply these things to yourself, not just for the family. Another element is, as we feel a loss of safety, we're not touching like we used to. We're not hugging like we used to. And at the same time, some of us are in very small spaces. It is very hard to get privacy that we need. And so one way to handle that is, and even with your teenager or your young child, to develop or designate what we call safe zones. So let's just say if you were in a one-room apartment, or maybe your house is really small, everybody needs to establish, you know what, when I'm sitting in this chair right here, I'm not here. Please don't talk to me when I'm sitting in this chair. Or when I turn my chair to face the window, please don't talk to me. That's my private time. I need to be alone. And of course, if you have a big enough space, then you can find a private corner. But the notion of needing to still have your privacy so you can have alone time, and balancing that with having interaction. Another thing that is going on, just to keep in mind, this might be happening in your family or those that you know, it's just the family legacy of what is happening during this time. There's a lot of people that have ancestors that died in the turn of the century when we had the flu epidemic. Many, many, many people died in the East from the flu epidemic. There are people alive today that lost their grandparents or their great-grandparents or their great uncle from that epidemic. And they are referring to that mentally at this time. Oh, here's another epidemic. That's when we lost Uncle Charlie, or that's the story my dad used to tell me about how he lost all his brothers. There are people who are dealing with that right now. And so it's good for us to be aware of that. And if you're dealing with that yourself, it's probably a good idea that you might want to reach out for some support from others, because that can be a really scary thing. Also, the vitality in our bodies. When we are alarmed, we have the fight or the flight or the freeze. And and getting back to what I was saying earlier about you need to move your body. We want our bodies to stay healthy as possible and vital, energetic, and able to face each day and the challenges that come with each day. And we don't feel safe when our bodies feel weak. So it's real important to try to give that some attention. And then a lack of sense of purpose. Lots of people have lost their jobs. And even if you haven't lost your job and you're working through this, or maybe you have worked in the home all along, this idea that, well, what am I doing? What am I doing in this world? So many people are getting sick and dying. What's my role? It's real important. Just keep your identity. You had an identity before this started, and you still have that identity. Do your thing. If it makes you feel good to wear a certain t-shirt for your Zoom meetings or for that trip to the grocery store when you're all masked up and gloved up, do it. Do all those little things that are just uniquely you, that you like to do. I was reading this article. This one person was saying they were a person that really enjoyed wearing jewelry, and they never had a need to wear jewelry being isolated at home. And then it just finally occurred to her, I'm just going to put on all my jewelry. And as she went about her Zoom meetings, she had all her jewelry on and she felt really good. She felt like she looked good, and she was ready to participate because she was feeling more whole, because she just did what she normally was doing. A lot of us are business on top and our blue jeans on the bottom. Whatever you need to do to keep your identity and feel good about yourself, and to continue to be yourself. That's what is recommended. Now, I think we have additional from Dr. Franz.
All right. Thanks so much, Pat, Tricia, Laura. I am Mike Franz. I'm a child psychiatrist. I practice clinically on Fridays, and I'm the medical director of Pacific Source, which is a medium-sized health plan for their behavioral health work Monday through Thursdays. Really a privilege to be here with all of you. I just want to start off by saying that you, as parents of kids that are often struggling with behavioral health conditions, you are the experts. In a lot of ways, more so than myself. And I encourage you to continue to support one another and to inform healthcare providers like myself what you need, what's helpful, and what isn't helpful. I come to this panel today with a lot of humility, because I think I'm talking to folks that actually know a lot more about what I'm trying to talk about than I do in some ways. So I look forward to our discussion as well, and some feedback and your thoughts about what's been helpful during this time. I'm really going to build upon what Pat has already said, and she's made some great points. So to start off with, let's talk about some tips for taking care of your own mental health. We have a couple of slides on that. This first one is about taking care of your body, your mind, and maintaining social connectedness. So in regards to your body, we really can't overemphasize the importance of regular exercise and sleep, as well as healthy nutrition. And if you're working from home, have a job outside, obviously you're working from home, but if you also have a job outside of the home, like I do, it's really important to get out of that chair. If you have access to a sit-stand desk, use it. Use an exercise ball if you can get your hands on one. There's even some relatively inexpensive exercise gadgets that you can put under your desk that will move, you can move your feet and so forth. I've developed some low back pain during COVID, and I'm absolutely confident because I'm spending much more time in my chair. So I'm challenging myself to do all of these things. As far as your mind goes, first let's really be considerate about the media that we're watching. There's a lot on television right now that can be very disturbing. And while it's important to stay informed, we really encourage you to seek out sources of truth as it relates to COVID anyway. World Health Organization, CDC, and other organizations. So just be aware of how much media you're watching and whether or not it's really healthy for you to bask in that throughout the day if you're doing that. Substance use has really exploded with COVID. It's quite unfortunate. In fact, the CDC did a survey in late June, so relatively early on, that shows that over 40% of those surveyed nationally are experiencing symptoms consistent with either a mental health condition or a substance use disorder. 40%, and substance use is a big part of that. We have people, 3 times as many people are reporting anxiety during COVID than they were a year ago. So if we already have an underlying substance use issue, it's a time to reach out to your sponsor, to those that are in your health provider community, to get additional help. And it's also a time to be that we're extra vulnerable and we need to be aware if our substance use is going up and monitoring that and be early to seek out help. Pat said something about be yourself, and I'm just want to accentuate that. Stay true to your values. This is what brings meaning to our lives. So don't modify what's valuable and important to you as much as you can right now. This includes the importance of altruistic behavior, if that's part of your values. During this time of loss, disappointment, one way we can bring hope is to be with others, do things for others, and altruism is a great way to do that and help us cope with the challenges of COVID. And then maintaining social connectedness. I think it's probably a cliche now, but I always like to say we're being asked to physically distance, not to socially distance. For a while there early on in COVID, I think people were using the term socially distancing. We do not and should not do that. We often need to be physically distanced, but connect with those that you care about. Do it virtually, set up virtual meetings and gatherings. And again, as far as the altruistic comment I made earlier, it's a time also to especially seek out those people that might be especially lonely, such as the elderly, and that can give even more meaning to your own life right now. Can we go to the next slide, please? So here we'll be talking about maintaining our natural supports, keeping routines, and paying attention to the relationships that we have. In regards to maintaining our natural supports, I encourage you to be proactive and intentional in connecting with your family, your friends, your healthcare providers, your clergy, not just mental health care providers, but your physical health care providers as well. And stay as involved as you possibly can with those community organizations and possibly religious groups that you've already been a part of prior to COVID. Keep your routines. Again, can't be overemphasized. Routines have changed and we've had to be flexible, but as we've developed new routines, we do need to stick with them as much as we can, and this creates some stability. Within those routines, we need to build in some R&R, some rest and relaxation, and schedule it into our day. It's really important to do that. That might be a brief nap or a walk around the neighborhood or a quick virtual video meeting with a friend. Notice the bad habits. I certainly have been developing some bad habits. My eating has been a challenge during COVID, and I try to have some mindfulness that Pat alluded to, and recognize it and then gently move away from it. Don't scold myself, don't beat myself up, but just say, there's a bad habit, and I'm going to try to gently move away from it. There's a place for some spontaneity, intentional spontaneities on the slide. This can break up the doldrums. We really need to find the balance of, the rigid routine versus having some awareness that I'm going to break it up a little bit right now. I'm aware that I'm doing it, and I'm going to, take the kids out of school today or for a couple of hours, and we're going to go outside and do something fun and different. That's okay. That's good, and I think it can be especially helpful right now as we can get in to some doldrums. Pay attention to our relationships. So in previous talks, I've had a whole slide on the increase in domestic violence and interpersonal violence. This is very worrisome. This is happening during COVID. There's some national data and international data that it's increasing in some countries by 50%. A lot of this is because we don't have as much externally monitoring of situations, kids not being in school physically, where a lot of domestic violence is reported, or interpersonal violence or child abuse. This is due to isolation and the decreased external monitoring. People are stuck at home. So have a safe check-in person if you're vulnerable, and look for warning signs in others and reach out to them if you're concerned or if you think that they might need help. And the first thing to start with for yourself or for others, if you're at risk or experiencing any interpersonal violence, is to develop a support and safety plan. And there's some resources, I believe, at the end of the talk, and I can get you some additional ones to help develop that safety plan if you need one. All right, moving on. Let's talk about some tips, from talking about tips to help ourselves to helping our family. So creativity, planning activities, lowering the expectations when appropriate, and acknowledging disappointment and loss. This is a time to be creative. We're more limited in what we can do, but we can use our imagination and we can do things safely that still add richness to our lives. So start a hobby. My wife has begun painting. I think she's probably done a dozen or two paintings since COVID has started. The children are doing, I have a 8-year-old and a 13-year-old, and they're doing a lot more drawing. Are also getting a lot more artistic, kind of building off what my wife is modeling for them. We're fortunate enough that we've been able to set up a ballet bar in our living room for our 13-year-old and 8-year-old who haven't been able to participate in their ballet lessons, so they can zoom in with their teacher and practice ballet even in our living room and keep up that interest and hobby. Do activities together, make dinner together, plan dinner together, do the shopping. Well, you might not want to do the shopping together, but you can at least plan the menu together. And again, on that altruistic front, think about serving dinner to others, dropping it off at their front door, especially those that might be more isolated. Ease up on what you expect out of yourself as a parent and out of your kids right now. It is a time to adjust expectations. I know we're going to talk later about that this is going on perhaps longer than we thought, and there's some realities there that we have to balance as we continue to talk about how can we ease off on expectations. But at this point, it's still important to adjust those expectations and really emphasize catching yourself and your kids doing well, not focusing as much on the negative, but accentuating what's going well for them, or when you're being a good parent. Acknowledge loss. And this is still on that last slide, but this is really important. This is a time of loss and pain for kids and adults. This is beyond difficult, but in order to limit the suffering, we need to first acknowledge the experience we're having and then move towards radical acceptance, which is something I think we can discuss in more detail, and it ties on the mindfulness that Pat brought up earlier. And by radically accepting, sitting, being with, acknowledging the reality we're in, we often can limit the suffering and move on with our lives, implementing some of the techniques that we're discussing today. All right, so let's talk about practical tips to help your kids, and talk a little bit about younger kids, tweens and teens, and I also want to just say something about young adults in transition. So with younger children, as with any child, it's really important to be developmentally appropriate as you engage them in conversations about COVID and what's going on. Let them lead. If they're asking questions about it, don't shy away from the answers. But don't catastrophize what's going on, and check your own anxiety. We all have some right now. There's a balance between being honest that this is hard and difficult and the danger that the virus poses versus overemphasizing that and adding undue anxiety to your kids. And I just can't emphasize enough with younger kids how important routine is. Try to keep those routines. It gives them a sense of safety and stability. For tweens and teens, routine is also important. These kids are at an age, and any parent of a teenager knows that their circadian rhythm is starting to change significantly, so that their natural sleep cycle is probably more in the order of 3 to 4 a.m. to noon. But now with remote learning, school back in session, it's even more important to really try to keep that sleep cycle on track as much as you can, and keep school as fun as possible. Hopefully the teachers are building in some breaks, but you might need to build in some additional breaks so that they're just not at the table nonstop studying, either doing a Zoom meeting or their homework. And it's still appropriate to lower some academic expectations right now. This needs to be individualized to your child's needs, but perhaps not expecting quite as much during the COVID emergency could be appropriate and be helpful for your family's overall health. For young adults in transition, I really encourage us to empathize with the significant losses they're having, whether it be seniors with prom or graduation, kids not able to go to college or coming back from college and having to live at home when that wasn't their plan, not able to get the jobs they wanted. They're really missing out on some key developmental opportunities and milestones. And again, sitting with them, acknowledging that pain, that grief, but then trying to help them accept it so that the long-term suffering doesn't set in.
Okay, so I'm just going to read this and open it up for discussion. What are some patterns that we are seeing with how people are handling the continued need for physical distancing? As I mentioned in the beginning, for us, there was some disrespect about masking. I think what I've seen was the 50-50, and now I'm seeing 75-25. I think in other communities they're seeing less. We don't have a mask mandate in our community. Some of our stores do. Those are not enforced, and so I think for our family, we have had to find our own fit. My kids know that I mandate masks. They attend some hybrid school. And so that's my rule. And so we're trying to find a balance for ourselves. And yet others are saying, well, come and join us for this large group activity. And I'm saying that doesn't work for our family, but that's okay for you guys. It just doesn't work for us. And so I think that my anxiety is not high, but this is my new normal and I'm okay with it. My family's okay with it. And I observe others that they're done. Does anyone else see that's happening in their communities, or what are the other things that you're seeing as people are handling the need for physical distancing? Pat or Mike?
So it's interesting, Tricia. I think I was just reading an article that was showing exactly what you were saying, that fortunately there is a general movement towards more people observing the need for physical distancing and wearing masks, as I think it's setting in that this isn't going away, and that we do have over 200,000 now dead in the country from COVID, and it's probably an underestimate. I think there's an appreciation of the reality of it. So I think that's good news, and I think there's increasing optimism that is going to continue. Obviously, it won't include the entire population. There are some people that I think are pretty set that that's not something that they're going to do, and I think that part of the population will likely not move on it. But I think there's going to be a bulk of the population, and we're getting close to it, that is observing the need for physical distancing, wearing masks, being safer. That I think it's going to start to move the dial. We need to do more right now. Obviously, we're starting to spike again. I think we're going to talk about that later in the discussion about what we can expect coming. But on the whole, I'm optimistic that the behavior is trending in the right direction. There's still those exceptions that are very concerning.
So we have a comment that says that there's a lot of people scared to even talk. Our kids can't stand masks and struggle to cooperate despite the rules. It's challenging for the providers and the family. So I agree with that. My kids, and I don't know, they're developmentally, they want to please mama. So they do that. But I also know that my son, when he goes to school, pulls that mask down around his neck. And so when I see him come home and I'm like, you weren't wearing your mask today. So I get it. I get that there are people that are continuing to struggle with masks. Providers and family are struggling with that. There's lots of products out there that can meet that need. And I think that if you have a kid, like I have an autistic son who just refuses. And so for him, unfortunately, sometimes he doesn't get to go to the dollar store if he's not going to choose to mask up. So yeah, we all continue to be scared. And I think that, but I like that you said, Dr. Franz, that we're seeing some optimism. I think that as we see that this continues, that, well, I have to say for myself, I know it's not forever. That we know there was a beginning, and I don't know when the end is, but I know there's going to be an end. That is just how cycles happen. That's predictable. There will be an end. Pat, did you want to say anything about what you're seeing with families and communities with physical distancing?
Well, one of the things I've observed is that there's people who wear masks and there's people who don't, and who choose not to. And I have noticed that sometimes people who do not have masks, they make funny faces, or they point, or you can hear them say something about a person who is masking.
Right.
And I just feel like that's so unfortunate. You know, and I can't even venture to guess as to what people's inspiration or motivation is to make fun of others who are masking, but I have been seeing that.
Well, you know, so I just an anecdote here. Yesterday, my daughter and I had to go to the pharmacy into the building to get our prescriptions. And I really noticed people, there's obviously some physical distancing that occurs. They have things on the floor. And then a gentleman in front of us was not masked, and he looked at us. And I just kind of stepped back a little bit. I was having to coax my daughter to stop touching everything. But I think he was trying to be mindful of us wearing a mask, even though he wasn't. And so it was like, that's interesting. You are trying to be respectful, and yet just not wearing a mask is disrespectful. And so they can't see me smiling underneath. Maybe my eyes twinkle a little bit, but I was like, thank you for distancing a little bit more from us, because I don't want to draw attention to myself or my daughter, but masking and physical distance is important to us. And so, yeah, I think I saw more of the making fun of earlier on. I don't see it as much here now. I did see it the first day of school. It was in the conversations that were happening. That was tense. That was tense. So let's go on with our discussion. I kind of talked about this already, but and this is a big thing that one of our director from Parent Network has talked about, is that much of our advice that we see online assumes that physical distancing and other precautions will end soon. How do we protect our mental health when we don't know when it will end? And so she has shared an anecdote that we know we can do something I can do this for 2 more weeks, or my assignment is done and then I don't have to worry about it. With this pandemic, there's no defined time. Even if there isn't a vaccine that's effective, we don't know how that's going to fall out. If it's going to be a positive and received openly. And how do we protect our mental health when we don't know when the end is? I, for myself, have to have my own value. My kids, they're young, 7, 8, 9. They're like, next year, when this is over, we can do this. And so I encourage that. I'm like, absolutely. Next Halloween will be different. Next summer, when we get to plan something. Now, even if that doesn't happen next summer, we're talking about it as if it will happen. Yeah. So next year we'll go camping with all the fam in McCall and get to play. Now, if it doesn't happen, that's okay. But we are planning that those things will happen. It gives us hope. It gives us something to look forward to. And so that's how we handle it within our family. we have to think forward like there will be an end. And so planning, next summer we're going to do this, and next summer we're going to have a big family barbecue. And I say yes, and we start planning and thinking about those things. Doesn't mean that that will happen in the next 9 months, 12 months. It means that we're having hope that it will happen. And so that's what helps us. But each of you can speak to that as well.
Tricia, I appreciate that. I think about this as this continues, and because we don't know for sure when it will end, I think it's increasingly important that each family start to think about a risk-benefit analysis for what the needs are of their family, and what the risk is, both for contracting COVID, but also the risk for completely isolating or shutting down or physically distancing to the point where, I guess at the worst, it could create an unsafe environment that is a significant threat in the home. My understanding is that the group that we're talking to right now are parents, many of whom have children with significant behavioral health concerns, sometimes maybe severe autism spectrum disorder and other kinds of behavioral health and developmental situations that really make it challenging to keep them cooped up, if not for themselves, maybe a more neurotypical sibling who might be struggling with their own mental health because of what's going on with the family dynamic, and there's risks with that as well. And so while I don't have the answer to calculate where the decision is when you do that risk-benefit analysis, I would encourage people to give themselves permission to do some of those calculations, because it's not an absolute answer one way or the other. And if you have a child that needs to increase their social bubble by another kid or two just to have, some stable mental health and to keep the parents' mental health stable, that might be a risk-benefit calculation that says we will do that, understanding that there's theoretically some increase that there'll be exposure to the virus. That's where I land on this. The longer it goes, I think that it becomes more challenging just to say you're absolutely going to shut down and have no risk whatsoever. But
Right.
Again, in a few minutes, I think we're going to get to maybe some ideas about when this looks like it could actually end. So I want to end with some hope.
Yes. So one of the participants said, she's explaining to her family that the viruses are normal. This one just happens to be a nasty one, and it helps to strengthen our immune system, and that they make adventures at home. So that was one of the participants' comments to us. So this, I don't know how many of you are familiar with radical acceptance. I have heard of it myself. Dr. Franz, I think you've talked about this in some of the work that you've done. The way I understand radical acceptance is, I don't want to, but I will. That's how I phrase it to my kids. And so, Dr. Franz, do you want to talk about radical acceptance?
Sure, I can say a few things that I'd love to hear from Pat, because I think she's done a fair amount in this area as well. I said a little bit about it earlier. It's really acknowledging when pain and grief is occurring, not shying away from it, sitting with it, knowing that it hurts, but eventually just coming to a notion that this is what we have now, and I'm going to need to continue in my life and my life with my family and others, and be able to let go a little bit about some of that maybe reaction to it, so as to avoid prolonged suffering. While the pain and the grief is real, we can impact the situation we're in by how we respond to it and how we continue to live with it. And when we aren't able to accept where we are, but just continue to fight against it, it's likely to lead to further suffering, which can lead to, of course, a child psychiatrist would say, development of pathological behavioral health conditions that then just amplify the situation. Mindfulness is a technique that I think goes hand in hand with radical acceptance. And mindfulness is a skill that can be learned, and largely, I think, through meditation, which I would encourage everyone to look into if you haven't already. Because like any muscle, you need to develop that muscle for it to really become effective. And mindfulness is a way to do that so that we become more aware of our thoughts and can let those go that aren't really productive or helpful, and yet still maintain some awareness. Pat, what are your thoughts?
And before I forget, I want to mention one thing about that with the mindfulness. A really good technique to use with your children, with yourself, any age actually, is to, you know, the bubbles, and you can make them out of your own dishwashing soap and water if you want. But those little bubbles with the wand that kids, you know, blow through the wand and make bubbles, there's a wonderful way for even your little kids all the way up through your teenagers. Hey folks, let's blow bubbles for a few minutes.
Yes.
And it takes a deep breath, and then you have to blow it out really slow. You can say, hey, let's see who's going to make the biggest bubble. It is a real, excuse me, effective way to do some deep breathing and to get a small child to do some deep breathing. It works like magic. It is a very calming experience. But to speak to the radical acceptance, as Dr. Franz was mentioning, that is closely connected to the mindfulness that I was speaking about earlier, and the idea that, if I can speak more broadly, a lot of our pain comes from the fact that something is the way that it is. And we want the opposite. So it's like we have two entirely opposite things. And what we're trying to do is find the middle road. So they're dialectically opposites, but if you go to one extreme or the other, that's going to lead to some pain. It's the middle road. And radical acceptance, part of that is that notion of it is what it is. That's the phrase we all understand. It is what it is. And it's the acceptance. I'm not going to resist that there is a pandemic going on. I'm not resisting that. I'm going to figure out how we are all going to survive it and come out on the other side better. Sometimes you might encounter people that are going in the opposite direction. Pandemic is made up. It's not real. It's to scare people. There's blah, 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 political overtones, whatever it is. That is a person who is like blocking out the other parts of the reality. So one of the things that we want to do whenever you find yourself in a situation and you're feeling like it's black or white, it's either this or it's that. Try to think about that it is not either this or that. There is a middle path between those two, and that becomes the challenge. So I do have to keep 6 to 10 feet away from everyone, but that doesn't mean I have to give up my relationship with that person. I can figure out how to connect with that person. Interesting, Dr. Franz mentioned they even adapted their home so his daughters could do their ballet. That is the middle path of, okay, you can't go out to ballet class, but what can we do so you don't lose your ballet skills? So it's trying to get that middle road. And if you can think about that, that will help you through a lot of challenges. It's not black or white. There is something in the middle.
Absolutely, Pat, I agree. So moving forward, what have we learned from COVID that we can use going forward? And so I think that when we look at this slide, so Dr. Franz, will you speak to this? Because you brought this to our attention. And I think it's really important that we kind of focus on this.
Yeah, let me start by orienting you to the slide, let you know where I originally saw it. I believe Tricia and Laura saw it in a SAMHSA document, which is what you're seeing here. And this is a more generalized slide, but it's the exact same one. originally, I saw Washington State's health department is sending out monthly updates on behavioral health ramifications of COVID and what you can do about it. And to orient you specifically to this slide, the y-axis, so up towards the top, is emotionally people are feeling pretty good. Down at the bottom, people are feeling really lousy. You can also think of that as having more actual behavioral health conditions. And then the x-axis is simply the timeline from the pre-onset of COVID, if you will. Here it's just a generic pre-disaster, but think of the disaster as COVID, and then where we are on this timeline. And right about where I think it's Tricia is showing the cursor right now is where Washington State says they think they are right now. And I would suggest it's probably not much different from the rest of the country. So we're obviously after the time of COVID onset. We've kind of gone past everyone standing in line in the hospitals and outside the hospitals applauding all the healthcare workers. They're not getting that kind of support anymore. So the heroic and honeymoon phase of, oh, we'll get through this together, has gone away. And we are dropping fully now into disillusionment, especially as we see a true second wave is upon us and getting ready to crescend even further. There's a lot of data suggesting that this fourth quarter 2020, that is October through December, is going to see a big spike in COVID diagnoses with increased deaths. And unfortunately, this does tie in with other risks, such as seasonal affective disorder, especially in the northern regions in which we find ourselves, less ability to get outside and recreate safely because of the weather changes, and then the coming holidays, which for a lot of people can be quite stressful. So it is right now kind of a perfect storm, and it's really time to pull together and use some of the coping skills that we've talked about and seek out community support. I don't want to leave it on a completely negative note, though. There's increasing evidence to suggest that a vaccine is coming. It may not be here as early as we had thought or had hoped, I should say, but it does look like, by the end of second quarter 2021, and I appreciate that's a ways off, but spring to summer of 2021, it's looking very promising that an effective vaccine will be available, and that the increasing physical distancing and mask wearing that people are starting to do will likely make a difference. So I think there's more optimism that an end is in sight, and it just may be further than we thought, and we're going to have to continue some behaviors longer than we wanted. But these next 3 months are very vulnerable, and I just want to call people's attention to that.
Right. So as we go through these vulnerable months, that we use those skills that we talked about: some radical acceptance, mindfulness, meditation. That there's been some comments about why am I disposable because I'm old or elderly or sick, or why are my children disposable? Honestly, no one in my mind is disposable, but we can't control others. And so you can influence and control your own situation and how you move forward. Part of that is making your own health and safety decisions for yourself and your family, but also using those techniques that we've discussed in these slides today. And please feel free to look at and explore these resources that Pat and Dr. Franz have made available to us. Dr. Franz has some videos that are great to watch that really dovetail nicely into the conversation here. We have Idaho resources, Idaho Federation for Families, which is where Pat is from. Super great resource, reach out to them. There's even some online virtual support things available as we continue to go through this. Definitely reach out and to your providers, because the more conversation that happens, the more resources can be developed, and we can really look at how can we support as we go through these next 3 difficult months and into 2021. So I hope that this presentation has assisted those of you that have watched and participated, giving you some ideas. Certainly has given me some more ideas about, oh, that meditation stuff I never do. Maybe I need to work on that. Telling my kids, when I'm in this place, I just need some space. So and my transitioning adult daughter, who has now become more mature than I was at that age, and she's saying, I want to go. She's done. She wants to go on a vacation to New York, Cabo San Lucas. I said, honey, I'm not feeling good about any of those things, but I support your decision. So she's missing out on some really important things in her life. And I'm there just saying, you decide for yourself what is best. So thank you for Pat and Dr. Franz. I've learned so much. I'm grateful for all your contributions. This will be on record on the Idaho Parent Network site. So please feel free to refer back to it or to share it with others. You both were fantastic. And thank you for contributing to having this be such a success today. So I think that's the end of our session, and you all have a great day. We have another session coming up next if you're tuned in for that. So thanks, Pat. Thanks, Dr. Franz.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.